Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this first full day of the third Academic Policymaker Conference on EU Cohesion Policy. We've got a tremendous program ahead with some 60 papers and 4 parallel sessions in the course of today. But this first session is essentially trying to set the context for the discussions that we have ahead of us. My name is John Bachtler. I'm Director of the European Policies Research Centre at the Universities of Strathclyde and Delft. And for this first session, we have a very distinguished and knowledgeable panel whom I'm delighted to welcome. We have Elisa Ferreira, Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms from the European Commission, who I'm sure feels very at home in this session as a former academic herself and a long record in national and parliamentary politics in Portugal and at European level. We have Natasha Tramišak, Minister of Regional Development and EU Funds of the Republic of Croatia. And can I take this opportunity, Minister, to thank you and your colleagues for hosting this conference in Zagreb. Again, the Minister has a very interesting record of working at the grassroots in terms of the development of projects and managing EU funds, and now, of course, at national level with responsibility for cohesion policy in Croatia. The Minister will have to leave us for a high-level meeting in the course of this session, but I'm very pleased that our State Secretary, who welcomed us last night, Šime Erlić, will be staying on stage. We have Emil Boc, President of the COTER Commission of the Committee of the Regions. Again, a distinguished background as former Prime Minister of Romania and Mayor of Cluj-Napoca in the west of Romania, the second largest city, again, which has an excellent record for innovation and entrepreneurship in the use of European funds. And last but not least, we have Alessandra Fagian, Professor of Applied Politics at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila in Italy. As you might have seen from the bio, ranked as one of the top 20 regional scientists worldwide, and a long history of working on regional issues, not just in Europe, but also in North America. So, an excellent panel of speakers to get us going. We are, as I say, quite tight for time, so without further ado, let me invite our first speaker, the Commissioner for Cohesion Reforms, Elisa Ferreira. Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Bachtler, and it's really a pleasure for me to participate in this event. Special word to dear Minister Tramišak, dear Natasha, President of COTER, dear President Boc, all of you, dear colleagues and researchers. What I'd like to share with you is, in fact, in the last few years, they have been a turning point for cohesion policy. 20 years hence, when people are writing the history of cohesion policy, I think sometimes that this will be seen as a key moment, together with other periods like the 1989 reform and the foundation of the modern policy. The direction we set in the coming years will influence the policy for many years to come. In the next few minutes, I will outline some of the challenges and changes that I perceive as being important to frame the discussion, as you just mentioned, Professor, and what we are doing to address them. And I'll try to finish with some questions on which I would like to listen to you, and I would really love to have more research, more thinking. In fact, the challenges we face, and they can be roughly categorized as trying to manage crises and at the same time shaping transformations. Crises, of course, have included, after the financial crisis and sovereign debt crisis, more recently the COVID pandemic, and then the Russian aggression in Ukraine. While transformations include the long-term challenges, the core of cohesion policy, the challenges of tackling the economic stagnation of regions stuck in development traps, as well as ensuring that all regions make a success of our green and digital transition and of long demographic changes. So it is this kind of dual approach that we have got to address. And we have got a lot of information to make us organize and try to find answers when we take account of the conclusions of the 8th Cohesion Report just published in February. For the health of our European Union, we must navigate all the crises and all the transformations while in fact fostering convergent development and leaving, as we usually say, no place behind. As we learn from geography of discontent, if places are left behind, they become bleeding wounds in our democracies. And as Europeans, one of our key values is that everyone and every place counts, and that everyone should be able to contribute and benefit from our shared common prosperity. As you also know, these last years, the cohesion policy has, in spite of all these long-term challenges, we have adapted very, very rapidly to face all the territorial challenges. For example, the speedy preparation and adoption of what we call the CRE, so the reaction to COVID crisis and all the disruption of the economic and labor market, and care packages designed respectively to tackle the economic and the health impacts of COVID, CRE, and the recent refugee crisis with, we called it CARE, shows our collective commitment. And here I would like to include and to pay tribute to the cooperation of the European Parliament Regi Committee and the Council, together, of course, with a lot of support from the Committee of the Regions, to adapting cohesion policy to the needs of the regions in the face of this crisis. Similarly, the Just Transition Fund was set up to help mining regions and other carbon-dependent regions to cushion the socio-economic impacts of transition to carbon neutrality. Again, a sign of our commitment to addressing territorial challenges, specific challenges. And this must remain our first and key objective in cohesion policy, to reinforce convergence among European regions and their structural resilience to be able to weather the challenges. Some of these challenges, such as development traps, are long-standing. Other challenges are new, but in each case, we want to understand the mechanisms to identify the drivers of disparities and the new opportunities to remove obstacles and bottlenecks to development, and to put the right tools into the hands of our regions so that they can build a prosperous future. We have identified, in fact, I think, our purpose, the why and the what of cohesion policy. However, the major challenge we face is how to do it, how to achieve. Given the diversity of situations across Europe, as well as the diversity of external shocks and impacts, some of them we cannot anticipate, how to act in the most effective manner. To succeed, we need a wide-ranging discussion where nothing is taboo and every point is fed by facts and evidence. In other words, we need researchers and we need people with practical experience. So where can you help? Let me offer some suggestions. First, we need to reposition cohesion policy as a central piece of European growth model. Cohesion as an enabler of both equity and efficiency. History has proven that trading one for the other is economically ineffective and socially sometimes explosive. How can we better support the right equilibrium in the transition to the future economy, ensuring simultaneously that this is done on the grounds of a green and digital transition, ensuring that this is done in the right way? Does this require a greater focus in terms of our priorities and objectives on the basis of our geographical scope? How to reconcile our common European level objectives with the need for territorial differentiation and place-based policies? How do we cope with crisis while maintaining a focus on long-term transformation, which is the key strength of the policy? In other words, how to ensure the right balance between flexibility, reactivity, and the policy's long-term structural orientation. And what is the role of traditional cohesion instruments, so these instruments that we are managing, these funds and other instruments, versus all the other horizontal policies and instruments that we developed at the European, national level? How can we ensure that their often space blindness does not hamper the effort to foster a convergent development? Second, we need to deepen the policy's roots in an understanding of geography and understanding of the place. Of course, territory matters, multi-level governance matters, especially when we consider the structural drivers of long-term disparities. We still need better and territorially tailored analysis of these disparities, as there is no one-size-fits-all. Why do some regions prosper and others decline? And how can we reverse this trend for those in decline or in stagnation? In particular, what can we do for peripheral regions, those structurally lagging behind, and those that, as we noticed in the 8th Cohesion Report, that are stuck in the middle income trap? How can they make the most of the new opportunities of the green and digital transition? For example, the opportunity for rural and ultra-peripheral regions to become powerhouses of renewable energy, the opportunities from digitalization and remote working modes to new forms of tourism. How can we make them work for all regions? What institutional and systemic changes will be required? My third point is the institutional and operational aspects of successfully delivering this multidisciplinarity policy across the many regions of Europe. How can we address structural bottlenecks in member states with low administrative performance? Shall we make support more tied to reforms? What kind of reforms? At what level? How can we better invest in the growth enablers? How can we better invest in people throughout their lives to equip them with the right skills? What is the institutional and the quality of the institutions that can deliver this? How to improve the principle of partnership, making the most of new participative delivery methods? How to better ensure, evaluate, and communicate what the policy delivers or can deliver? How can we ensure the additional principles unlocking additional public and private investments? How can we further streamline and simplify the delivery of the policy so that beneficiaries find it user-friendly, while at the same time keep the focus on the policy, keep measuring and evaluating and being accountable for what is being done and accountable for its progress and impact along the delivery of the projects? Well, I'm kind of sharing with you all sorts of questions. As you can see, questions is what we have, and much research is needed because all these questions will define the policy in the decades to come. To contribute to this reflection, we decided, and I personally am very engaged in setting up a high-level group on the future of cohesion policy. That will be the core, but I want to listen to a lot of contributions. It should start this reflection, its work at the beginning of 2023, collecting evidence and expertise with a view to come up with recommendations on the policy by early 2024. But we'll need the commitment and engagement of the wider cohesion community, as we may call it, and beyond. We need the academic community, but we also need the policy practitioners. So I welcome the presence here today of representatives of national and regional entities. You are the closest to the realities and of the needs on the ground. Your ideas, recommendations, solutions are absolutely needed. Your contribution will be used to feed the reflection on the future design of the policy. I urge you to get involved in this process and indeed in the broader process of collecting evidence on the impact and design of the policy. These are my questions to you, and this is my invitation to you. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts and your insights, and I would love to keep this dialogue going. So I count on you. Thank you very much for what you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that inspiring opening of our plenary and of our conference, setting out not just the challenges, but also some key questions for the future. Let's go then straight on now from the European to the national level. And can I give the floor to Natasha Tramiszak, the Minister of Regional Development and EU Funds from Croatia. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bachton. Thank you, Commissioner Ferreira, dear Elisa, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts on what may be the most challenging period of the cohesion policy so far. Thank you also for being a strong voice of cohesion at the Commission. Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear everyone, dear participants at this conference, please accept my apology for not being there in person with you, since you are in Zagreb, but I have to be at the Parliament today. So this is the reason that I'm joining you online through these channels. Let me just say what a tremendous pleasure it is for Zagreb to be an organizing of this event, to be an organizer for this next 2 days. As we all know, different unprecedented events have occurred in the last 2 years, leaving no one impartial, and those new developments, just like COVID crisis, had an impact on cohesion policy in its short-term as well as long-term goals. Cohesion policy is primarily a development tool, and it should be kept as such. This is something that we in Croatia know and now feel for this last almost 10 years of being a member country of the Union. It is therefore perhaps no better time than today to discuss the current and future of these policy challenges and opportunities, when it seems that the challenges have never been more complex and yet opportunities never greater. But challenges we face today are inevitably changing our future. The green and digital transition are underway, and yet so much more has to be done and discussed for us to be certain that no one is left behind. As we all know, the climate challenges are rising, and the world is rapidly changing, so we all need to adapt. The past 2 years were indeed crucial in terms of many global changes, showing us the real strength of cohesion policy. And we've shown the flexibility of such. First, of course, the pandemic that has caused an unprecedented human health economic crisis with devastating long-lasting effects on large number of different areas across the EU. And then the war in Ukraine continued with a significant refugee crisis, but also even further economical disbalances. We all know that different national and regional capacities to deal with negative consequences are greatly different between the member states. and between different regions. So now we have a fear that it could eventually result in asymmetric recovery and lead to increased regional disparities. So this can happen, and the risk of increased disparities puts also a bigger burden on cohesion policy than ever before. Not all of our needs can be solved throughout the cohesion policy and its funding, but it can be truly a game changer. At the same time, the main focus of the cohesion policy for the next period, 21-27, is providing a strong support to EU's long-term recovery and resilience, focusing, of course, on green and digital transition, which by any cost should not be delayed or put aside. We should keep it as our main target and as our main goal in the decades to come. Therefore, the Republic of Croatia directed most of the funds in the green and digital transition by encouraging investments in sectors that are stimulating growth and contributing to the green and digital transition. AIM is recognized both in partnership agreement and cohesion policy programs. And thanks also to all different levels of Commission, especially to Ms. Ferreira and her team, that Croatia now has and approved the main program of the cohesion funds, our operational program Cohesion, Competitiveness and Cohesion. So we are now at the beginning of preparing ourselves for the usage of this new program. Investments will be made in adopting the cohesion principles with special emphasis on areas covered, of course, by research and innovation, energy transition, but also focused on development of skills and competencies, digital skills, smart specialization, and industrial transition to make these processes complete. But also regarding the need to develop the infrastructure in Croatia, the investments will be implemented in accordance with the donor significant norm to the environment, especially environmental infrastructure in sustainable modes of transport, promotion of multimodality, development of transport connectivity, completion of TNT network, and further development on maritime affairs and connections. Improvement of public services, especially in terms of digital transformation of society, and all of those investments, we must address all aspects of the climate crisis, including pollution, decline of biodiversity, waste, and emissions. So in shortly, these are the basics of our new program. The cohesion policy funds are crucial for all mentioned, and it is clear that there is a need for a speedy deployment of cohesion policy funds. Last month also, the Commission set new measures to allow member states to redirect unspent cohesion funds toward SMEs and households coping with the rising energy crisis and rising energy bills. But the cohesion policy is and should remain the most important solidarity and investment EU policy. And as you all know, now it has 30 years of history proving its indispensable role. We see its significance in Croatia and how it benefited greatly since becoming the member state. When we speak now about the usage of the cohesion policy funds in Croatia, we are now at almost 78% of all the allocation already paid to our beneficiaries for completing the projects and the project activities. But being committed to reduce disparities between the levels of development and aiming to achieve the convergence, the cohesion is mainly channeled to less developed regions in all member states. And the Croatia now will benefit by the end of 2023 with the reach on impact on the Croatian GDP around 5%. So the proof is there. Cohesion policy works and delivers significant results. It is expected that this new perspective will have even bigger positive impact on the regions across the EU. We cannot wait for results to be seen. It is already necessary to join forces to ensure the strong cohesion policy in the future by implementation of the new projects and the achievements that should start very soon. But still, we are afraid of growing perception of the cohesion policy as a crisis mechanism. as well as the new instruments and new models. As we all know, the Commission now has a new tool. It's called a Recovery and Resilience Facility. But in terms of recovery and resilience, this is a new tool. In terms of facing the development, the reforms, and it's yet too soon to have a full picture of its advantages and disadvantages. So therefore, we need to work all together to share our ideas and experience. I believe that this conference is a great start, especially since we will be able to hear the opinions of all relevant policy stakeholders. The new fresh ideas based on long tradition and experience are needed. We have to look in the future of development of EU's regions and where we want them to be, having in mind that all regions, cities, municipalities benefit from the cohesion. It would be a great loss for everyone if we could lose it along the way. And as you already may know, Croatia has developed in this new programming period some new tools to help the less developed regions in Croatia, to help the islands, to help the cities, and to help the regions. Hope this conference will give us a clear vision for long-term objectives. Thank you all for participating, especially you from the communities, from the ministries, and also from the academic sector as experts that are looking at the cohesion for so many years now and probably can give us more clear vision and more answers. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Minister, for giving us that perspective from Croatia, both looking back at the achievements and the role of cohesion policy in the first full programming period for the country in the most difficult circumstances, but also highlighting some of the interesting and very innovative approaches to programming in the forthcoming period. So thank you again. One of the defining features of cohesion policy, of course, is its multi-level governance character and its place-based focus, and which has already been touched on by our previous two speakers. But we're delighted that we're joined by Emil Bock, President of the COTER Commission. And Mr. Bock, can I give you the floor? Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Commissioner Ferreira, dear Minister, dear professors, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you so much again for offering me the possibility to talk with you on such a high-level conference and to talk about current and future challenges and opportunities for cohesion policy. For the members of the European Committee of the Regions, a strong and effective cohesion policy for all regions of the European Union is at the center of our DNA. Cohesion policy is the glue that keeps us in the European Union together. And here I want to emphasize the very first challenge. How can we keep cohesion policy not as a technicality in the European Union, but as a very political principle of our union? Because the cohesion policy is part of our treaties and should not be treated as a technicality as it is usually done in some parts of our European Union. So I would like to mention that the cohesion policy, it's a very political principle of our union. The second element I want to emphasize here is what Commissioner Ferreira mentioned last month in Brussels in a conference. She quoted the World Bank and she said that the cohesion policy is the best convergence machine in the world. That convergence machine, which is the cohesion policy in the European Union, brought investment, development, quality of life, sustainability in every corner of our Europe. So if European Union is a model of convergence, how can we keep in the future the same aspect for the entire European Union? So from that perspective, more economic, social, and I would add digital and territorial cohesion is the answer to the increased polarization in our societies for defending our democratic values. The partnership and multi-level governance principles are essential to bring Europe closer to the citizens and to strengthen local democracy. Cohesion policy, yes, has been effective in addressing the financial and COVID crisis. How? By mobilizing additional funding, making spending on the crisis response eligible, and allowing higher co-financing rates. However, despite all efforts, regional disparities remain high, and some of them are even growing. For example, particularly employment rates in less developed regions remain far below those in more developed regions. The regional innovative divide in Europe has grown. The gender gap in employment is twice as big in less developed regions as in developed regions, and there is a large urban-rural divide with regard to education attainment and skill levels. So, key challenges remain for leaving no one and no region behind. This is particularly relevant for the many rural regions that are suffering for depopulation and economical decline. And I would add here another challenge, for example, concerning the brain drain. How can we deal with the brain drain in the European Union? Of course, freedom of movement, it's a religion in the European Union. We cannot touch the freedom of religion. But how can we do that? Then no one should be forced to leave his own city, region, or country due to the economical reason. They can move voluntarily in the European Union, but should not be forced to leave due to the economical reason. And here, the cohesion policy is one of the answers. Together with education and quality of life and investments and better jobs and better salaries, I think we can turn brain drain to brain gain through brain circulation. I think this is the solution. And again, here, as I mentioned before, the cohesion policy is at the center of it. In order to use our brain, to use our talents in Europe, and to have a more balanced, developed regions in every corner of our European Union. Now, what about other challenges of the cohesion policy? And with your permission, I will mention a few of them. First of all, there is a need for sufficient flexibility on the ground to adapt the strategic framework of cohesion policy towards the local and regional challenges and to enable our cities and regions to tackle the various crises. And here, with your permission, please, if I may have on the screen some of the slides I invite you to see together, if it's possible. And I want to show you one challenge, and you have now the very first slide on the screen, and it's about our administrative capacity on the ground to deal with different programs. You can move now to the next slide, please. You can see that even in the most advanced EU countries, the rate of absorption of European funds is declining from financial exercise to another financial exercise. Here we have just a 7 years period, not +3. Just at the end of 7 years period, you can see there is a decline of how we can absorb the European funds. Of course, it is a question. If France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and other countries have such a trend to diminish the capacity of absorption of European funds, how about the entire Europe? Of course, it's not better in the other parts of Europe. So now let's move to the next slide to see why we are in this situation. And you can see here the complexity of our period of time, because in this very moment, as you can see, we are facing with a lot of complexity, European Green Deal, thematic concentration, strong horizontal principles, performance framework and midterm review, partnership principle, enable conditions, new initiatives such as the Bauhaus, New European Bauhaus, and so on. So what is the consequence? Next slide, please. And you'll see now the consequence of this. If I have next slide, that's perfectly. And you can see here that the same managing authorities at local, region, and national level have to deal with multiple parallel requests, reprogramming the old programs, for example, closing 2014-2020 programs, using Next Generation EU, the Resilient Facility, programming the Just Transition Fund in the eligible regions. So I would say in a word, 3 jobs for one administrative capacity. So we have to deal with 3 more jobs in the same time, closing all programs, new programs, resilient facility, GTF, and so on. So here we need, and next and the last slide, please now. And we need first to speed up the approval and implementation of the new programs, because we are in the end of 22 and we didn't start yet the new program 21-27. So definitely we need to speed up, because our citizens are expecting to see concrete results on the ground, not to hear just we postponed, we are late, we are doing our best. No, we have to implement. The second, to identify areas for simplification and increased flexibility. We need more flexibility and simplification on the ground, keeping transparency and efficiency, of course, but more simplification and flexibility is needed on the ground, because otherwise we are not going to be able to deal with Just Transition Fund, with a resilient facility, with a new program, closing the whole program. We need to be as pragmatic, as flexible as possible in order to deliver concrete results to our citizens. And last but not least, to propose measures on how to strengthen the capacity building of local and regional actors in the executing the programs. So I do believe this is a key element to move forward. Now, another challenge. We also need multi-level governance and effective decentralization to ensure that local and regional levels have the necessary capacity to manage the change. So effective decentralization in whole Europe is, as a part of our subsidiarity program or subsidiarity principle, is a key component. It's also clear that cohesion policy alone cannot deal with all these issues, and that cohesion as an overall value of the European Union should be supported by all EU policies. As we always said, the spirit of cohesion should be embedded in every policy of the European Union. We should not lose sight of the long-term focus of cohesion policy to lead to structural changes and sustainable convergence, as Commissioner Ferreira and the Minister of Regional Development for Croatia mentioned before. We need a cohesion policy for the whole European Union. We have to have a win-win situation, not just some parts are winning, someone are losing. That's not the case of our Europe. We need to have a win-win situation. And I would give an example. The Just Transition Fund, it is the best example how the cohesion policy is working for the entire European Union, dealing with decarbonization, dealing with the mining process, and helping every region, every country of the European Union. The primary objective of the cohesion policy is to reduce disparities, to help member states and regions in the European Union to reduce their development gaps. But it's equally important to reinforce competitiveness across all regions and help tackle social exclusion everywhere. And in this regard, the European Committee of the Regions has always supported a strong and ambitious cohesion policy for the European Union. But in the same time, we have to pay attention. Cohesion policy should not be understood as the repairing tool for the damage other EU policies have created with regard to cohesion. Moreover, there is an urgent need to rethink the current approach to create more and more new instruments they are intending to support cohesion. We have to avoid fragmentation. Overcoming the fragmentation of the cohesion policy funds is a must. Instead of this fragmentation, for example, with a new social climate funds as a new tool outside the cohesion policy instruments, there should be in the intention to strengthen the existing system of instruments under shared management, not having this kind of fragmentation. So from this perspective, I strongly ask for avoiding the fragmentation of the cohesion policy. And I will like to emphasize another aspect of the cohesion policy in our Europe, solidarity. In the context of cohesion policy, solidarity is not expressed through compensatory income payments, but through support for development. In this sense, cohesion policy can be seen as a help to self-help. We always know that, a help to self-help. And its success depends to a large extent on the capacity and the preparedness of those at whom the support is targeted to make the best possible use of it, including for the building of good governance and administrative capacity. Let me conclude, dear colleagues, by saying that cohesion policy brings jobs and growth in every corner of our Europe and is the key policy for the future of Europe. The cost of no cohesion is the cost of no Europe. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to our discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Box, setting out a very clear agenda for the reform debate, which I'm sure we'll be coming back to in the course of the discussion at the end of this plenary, but also throughout the conference. We've heard from three policymakers from European, national and sub-national perspective. Let's turn now for an academic perspective and to our fourth speaker, Alessandra Fagia. Alessandra.
Right, so we didn't see each other presentations actually before coming over here, but I'm glad to tell you that two of the key words in my few slides will be solidarity and fragmentation. So, you know, I have for sure certain things in common with the previous speakers. Right, so I'm not going to tell you the history or what cohesion policy is, because you're all experts on this, but I wanted to start pointing out that the main goal in the long term is territorial solidarity, exactly in the same way that it was explained before. However, the COVID changed things quite a bit, right? So we were all in emergency. I'm from Italy, you can tell from my accent maybe, although I've been abroad for 18 years, I never changed that, unfortunately. And so I can assure you that being in Italy in 2020 was quite scary. I really realized the power of science and how scary it is, the unknown, so ignorance. We were so ignorant about the virus. And so thank God for all the help that we received and for the money that poured in to Italy as well in response of the coronavirus. But this changed the cohesion policy because in that period it became an emergency tool and a lot of money was actually poured into this effort. The first half of 2021, basically also in response to the coronavirus, the national economies were asked to work on what we call the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, the NPRRs, right? And I don't know if, I'm pretty sure you're all aware that Italy, my country, asked an incredible amount of money for this national plan. In fact, right now we are all worried because the amount that we are borrowing is so large, it's twice that of grants. And you know, if you do a calculation, I'm leaving about 5,000 euros debt to my son, who is now 12 years old. So I feel very responsible, right, for him. And this is counting everybody in Italy from 0 to 100, not just the working population. So it is really scary, and I feel the responsibility of actually trying to help as much as I can so that my son won't be poor or in debt up to his hair once he grows up. This is how we feel, most of us feel at least. There was a great variety in the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience in the amount requested, in the mix of grants and loans, as I said, and also in the allocation to each of the 7 pillars. And even more than that, I'll show you in a second, if you're actually looking at the amount that Italy is planning to invest in the territorial cohesion, you'll be amazed because you think we are doing very well. Well, actually, I'll challenge that in a second. So, as I said, this is, I've just taken 2 cases. Since I'm in Croatia, I've picked Croatia as a comparison. But this is how much Italy, my country, actually is taking out of Europe for the NPRR. And you can see that we are asking for a very, very large amount of loans. We are the first one in the chart. Maybe not a record that we wanted to have, but we are. And then, if you are looking at the allocation to the pillars, here I'm especially interested in the social and territorial cohesion one. Italy is actually doing very well on paper, right? We are putting so much money into this 4th pillar that you would think, okay, so you're doing okay with cohesion. But is all good with the NPRRs? Well, this is what we were interested in finding out. So with my group at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila, we started looking at some of these NPRRs. We started, of course, with Italy, because it was the one that was worrying us the most. And then we went on to look at also at Portugal and Spain for a couple of reasons. First of all, we wanted to look at the Mediterranean countries for comparison reasons. The second is that Portugal is often quoted as a good example, virtuous example for territorial policy. Okay, I'm staying a little bit further away. And Spain, maybe I'll switch one off. Can you still hear me with one? Okay. And then Spain, because they do have an issue with peripheral and rural areas as much as we do in Italy. So we started with these three, but we are churning and looking at all the NPRR. It will take time because we're actually trying to do a very detailed examination of these plans with the lens of how much they will either hamper or help with territorial cohesion. And spoiler, I hope that by the end of my talk you will realize that if anything, I think we will need cohesion more after this coronavirus crisis, not less. Let's start with reminding ourselves what we mean by place-sensitive, place-based. Place-sensitive is actually more correct, rather than space-blind policies. So when we looked at this National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, we reminded ourselves what the Barca report was saying. So that the successful policy, right, needs, in terms of social and territorial cohesion, needs the involvement of the actors, need to be really focused, and the governance is very important. By looking at the Italian case, I'm going to show you how we looked at these three dimensions, and then we'll discuss later on. This is just some food for thoughts, just some to start the debate and the discussion. Okay, so this is just a brief recap of the Italian NPRR. I don't want to really go into details, just look at the total, 248 billions. This one includes also 30 billions of complementary funds. I'm just mentioning it because within this fund, there's probably the only part of the national plan which is really place-based, which is the 1.7 billion for the areas in the center of Italy for the reconstruction after the earthquake. This is a ring-fence amount of money that is just for these peripheral regions that were struck by the earthquakes in 2009 and 2016. There is a commissioner. I'm actually an expert on this. We just closed the public tenders, and we talked about digital and green transition in peripheral areas. We got a lot of demands for almost everything. The two areas where these peripheral areas are struggling, and we didn't have enough demands, were actually energy community and the circular economy. Because we talked about absorption capacity, they don't have absorption capacity in this new line, so they need to be helped even more on this, just as a nice aside of this. Right, so we looked at the usual 6 missions that are mentioned in all the European policies right now, going from the digitalization to inclusion, cohesion, education, health, and so on. But here is where the problem lies. So in our national plan, territorial cohesion is meant as a macro scale divide between the north and the south. So in a sense, we went back to the old logic that we had with, I don't know, Cassa del Mezzogiorno, or even before that, where what really matters is this macro non-cohesion that there is between the north and the south of Italy. So because we had to do the things very quickly, and speeding up, I hear very often, we have to speed up, we have to do things quickly. Well, time is actually an enemy in this case, because it's very difficult to do proper territorial cohesion fast. And I understand there is no other way of doing it, but we have to be aware of this. So because we had to do this all very fast, the easiest way was for the Italian government to say 40% has to go to the south. But as Professor Viesti rightly pointed out in an article last year, This total, which is 82 billion, is, well, in Italian it sounds better, but I had to translate it. It's a total whose addends are missing. We know how much we have to spend, but we have no idea how we're going to spend it in the South. And we talked about absorption capacity. There will be a problem with absorption capacity. There is a problem with institutional quality. Most of this money will be allocated via public tenders, and some of the municipalities in the South don't have the capacity to even apply for these public tenders. We already had some examples of how things are not really working with this system. But what I'm claiming here is that what the dimension we should really look at, it's not this macro division between the North and the South, but a more micro, meso here I called it, scale, where we are looking at marginalized versus central areas. And here the situation is a lot more complex. Unfortunately, although we had a strategic public policy which was systematic and dedicated to filling this gap, which was the national strategy for inner areas, this has not been taken into account at all in our National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. For instance, we talked about fragmentation before, right? If you go through the hundreds of pages of our plan, the marginalized area are called with all different sorts of different names: rural areas, mountainous area, villages, small municipality, urban suburbs, inner areas, southern areas. It's not clear what's the target of our cohesion. What are we trying to solve? I'm going to go through this very quickly, but these are the intervention, and in the last column, you can see to what type of marginalized area they are referring to. So in the digitization, innovation, blah, 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 pillar 1, we talked about municipality under 3,000 inhabitants and rural municipalities. In the second one, we talk about islands, union of municipalities, mountain communities, and then municipalities, but not under 3,000, this is under 5,000. And then we talked about municipality of the Po River course, rural mountain, inner areas, southern suburbs. Every different policy has a different definition of what peripheral means. And, well, in health, which I think is one of the areas where we need help the most in peripheral areas, there is no mention to peripheral areas at all. It was one of the 3 essential services of the inner area strategy, right? Transport, schools, so education and health. In our health plan, central and peripheral areas are treated the same way. Yeah, I'm almost done. So this is the fragmentation I wanted to see. This is an example. So one of the lines before was by the Minister of Cultural Heritage. Instead of looking at the inner areas as a systematic way, here we are just picking winners. One small village for each region. We give them 20 million per village. Now it's 24 because of the TF Ukraine. And we ask them to develop. Now I'm helping with this one because this municipality has 137 inhabitants. The mayor doesn't even have a secretary. Another thing that it's worth mentioning is that there has been no participation, because participation takes time. And the emergency, right, meant that we had to speed up things. So I mention this because I think that monitoring is going to be extremely important. We talk about doing things very quickly, but if we are not monitoring what's happening, that's going to be a big problem. And the same with governance and the renewal of the public administration, because the Italian plan has been very centralized. So some preliminary reflection. This is my last slide, so I have 2 minutes. I can spend 2 minutes on this one. When we talk about cohesion, we have to think about what cohesion in emergency means. And in the case of Italy, but in general, I think in other countries as well, because we do have some preliminary results on Spain and Portugal, we thought more of the national level. So the priority was to help the countries, so we were probably doing cohesion at the country level, but it meant that maybe Italy will be richer, but the gap between the peripheral and the central area will actually, I think, increase, not decrease. And the problem is time. So we're doing it in emergency, but less time means that we have necessarily to take a more top-down approach, which is less place sensitive, because place sensitivity takes time. We have all this knowledge which is dispersed over the territory, and we need some enlightened coordinator that goes, picks it up. I mean, it's not just bottom-up, it's a combination of top-down and bottom-up, but we need to listen to what they need, and we haven't done that. So there is a trade-off between spending as quickly as possible, which was the logic, right, in the last few days, and support a proper recovery, ensuring that, you know, the money that we spend fulfills their long-term development objective, one of which is territorial cohesion. It was very clearly stated, right, that one of the objectives had to be that one. We need to look at the finer territorial level, and then, I'm gonna keep on saying this, we are now setting the goal for the future, but without monitoring what is happening right now, that will be pointless. We need to have the flexibility to change over time. And also, I will make sure that simplification doesn't mean that we then do not monitor what is happening right now with this National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandra, for highlighting one of the big issues that are facing us in cohesion policy, particularly with the role of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and importantly, how that's being translated into practice. And you picked out a whole series of issues that I think will be echoed in the course of today and tomorrow on marginalised areas, on citizen engagement, on administrative capacity and the quality of governance, and crucially the trade-offs that are being made in implementation. Well, thank you to all four of our speakers who have very nicely set out the challenges and opportunities facing cohesion policy. We have about half an hour for questions, and while you're reflecting on questions, let me just try and draw together some of the key points that emerged from the discussions, and if you like, contextualize the presentations that we'll be hearing in the course of today and tomorrow. We are at the moment in a very interesting time because it's the sort of classic three-period phase of cohesion policy. Firstly, the current period, which is 2014 to 2020, in terms of commitment, is not yet over. And as we heard from the Minister, there is still the finalisation of the current programme, of the 2014 to 2020 programme expenditure underway, moving into closure next year. And if we think back to the programming for this period, it was done very much in the shadow of the economic and financial crisis, as the Commissioner pointed out. And it was very much about programming for recovery, which also reflected the way in which funding was allocated to member states. This was also a period with high ambitions in terms of significantly raising the bar in terms of the achievement of results, with the performance framework, the use of conditionalities, the emphasis placed on administrative capacity building through DG Regio and DG Employment. But of course, latterly has had to deal with the COVID crisis, which I think is generally acknowledged cohesion policy responded extremely well to and made a big difference. But of course, the ex post evaluations for this 2014 to 20 period are only just being commissioned. So the question is, where is the evidence? What is the evidence? And this is where I think the work being done by people in this room and in the wider cohesion policy community, I think, is so important in providing guidance for the future. But of course, hardly is the 2014 to 20 period being wrapped up. Of course, we're launching the 21 to 27 period through the partnership agreements and the programs, which again, as we heard, are still being negotiated. And of course, we've got more crises. We've got, of course, recovery from COVID, but we've got the Ukraine crisis in terms of refugees and the reduction of energy reliance on supplies from Russia. Beyond that, of course, the ambitions for this period are also significant in terms of the Green Deal, in terms of digitalization, but there are also wider challenges, as was mentioned, in terms of demographic change, for example, and issues of migration. And, crucially, in terms of the policy landscape, we have the RRF, initials which we'll hear quite a lot of, I think, in the course of today and tomorrow. And it was very clearly outlined by Alexander just now, the kind of challenges that there are. And it has, of course, implications for the thinking about the future of cohesion policy. And of course, a lot of it sounds very attractive, but of course, we don't yet know about the effectiveness of national recovery and reform plans. We don't know about their efficiency, and of course, accountability. So, you know, there are some big questions in terms of drawing lessons. And of course, the third period that we're already reflecting on, as we've heard, is the post-2027 reform of cohesion policy. And here we have a lot of difficult questions, perhaps more difficult questions than I think we've ever had to address at this point in the cycle since 1988. As the Commissioner and others said, there is an overarching question of, if you like, EU values and the role that cohesion policy plays in terms of solidarity, and particularly addressing the disconnect, the geography of discontent that colleagues in the room have written about and we've all been concerned about. And then translating that into addressing the treaty commitments for economic, social and territorial cohesion. And the key questions have been highlighted in terms of the role of place, role of territories, the role of the regions, the future of multi-level governance, how that develops, institutional frameworks across different types of EU instruments, issues of the quality of governance, issues of the delivery method, and terms flexibility, simplification, absorption. These were all really important keywords that were highlighted by Amy Bock about very, very practical issues which affect how, at the project level, cohesion policy works. All of our speakers have highlighted questions for the academic and policy communities to address and for us to be discussing today. So a very interesting set of issues that have been highlighted as the context for our conference. Now we have, I think, about half an hour left. We have just under half an hour left for questions, and we can take questions in the room, and you can also pose questions online, which should appear on this iPad, if I can get it to work. So feel free to type, if you're listening online, feel free to put your questions in, and I'll read them out and address them to our speakers. But who'd like to start? And if you'd indicate which of our speakers you would like to answer the question. And if you could say who you are and which organisation you come from. Yes, sir. I think do we have a roving microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Eduardo Medeiros from Lisbon University Institute. I have an overall question to all speakers. They can all answer. I've seen some questions and some solutions. Some of them is improving simplicity, simplification, flexibility. But my question is, what about project selection? It's one of the things that I've studied cohesion policy for many years. And when I look at the projects database, I see some problems. I see that they don't align with the needs of the regions. And my question is always, who selects these projects? So why doesn't the Commission and as concerns about this? So it's my question for the Commissioner and for all speakers, if they see this as a problem like I do, and if they see it, do they have an answer to this? And a specific question to Alessandra. She spoke about the need of monitoring and evaluation. I think you come from economics. You probably know that territorial cohesion is not just about economy, it's about many other dimensions. What are the indicators that you would use to implement an effective monitoring and evaluation system? That's my questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that, for the first question. Let's take a couple more questions. Yes, Thomas.
Yes, Thomas Robin from the Committee of the Region. I would have a question to the Commissioner. Commissioner Ferreira, you mentioned the new economic growth model. We have not only 30 years of cohesion, but we have also 30 years of the internal market, of the common market. And cohesion was basically linked to making the common market work. Wouldn't it be needed to strengthen this dimension in the debate? We have a lot of activities to promote 30 years of the common market, but not really very much linked to the essential tool to keep the market, to give everybody a chance. So that's my first question. And one question to Alessandra. On centralization, Emil Bock spoke about the question of effective decentralization. Don't we have in the RRF spending also a huge centralization mechanism which is losing out the place-based approach? What is your assessment there?
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. One more question, yes, over here.
Hello, Michael Woods from Aberystwyth University. I have a question prompted by Alessandra, but others may also want to answer, and I'm particularly interested perhaps in the Commissioner's response. Which, Alessandra, you mentioned the question of scale, and this is a question we also explored in the recently completed Horizon 2020 project, Imagine. We tried to look at inequalities beneath the nuts to scale. And my question, therefore, is to what extent, what are the prospects for a more spatially sensitive cohesion policy, which goes down to a lower geographical scale, acknowledges those differences, and perhaps how we get there, and particularly overcoming the problem which is about the compatibility of data at that scale across Europe seems to be a major obstacle at the moment.
Okay, thanks very much. Nice to have some easy questions to get us going. Can I perhaps divide these up among our speakers? And Commissioner, perhaps you'd like to deal with the question on cohesion policy and strengthening the single market that we got from Thomas Robin. Alessandra, you've got a number of questions related to the RRF.
No, so I hope I remember all of them.
Okay. Essentially on the indicators for allocating the RRF, its contribution to place, and the challenge of the spatial focus of cohesion policy. And perhaps State Secretary and Emil Bock, you could take the questions on project selection that we had, criteria that we had right at the start. But let's kick off. Commissioner, perhaps you'd like to.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. But I'd like to touch upon the other questions as well, because I find them very interesting, if you don't mind. But yes, I would start with the core question that you allocate to me. It's the relationship between cohesion policy and common market, or internal market, full competition. And yes, I think we have got to go back to the basics, because so praise the common market and internal market and free competition. And if we add to it the common currency, that is the currency of the European Union. So even if there are countries that opt out, it's a single currency. We have got to have, on the other hand, the capacity that the competitiveness of the different regions is in fact has behind it an engine that brings in convergence. And sometimes we miss this perception when we forget. We have kind of blindness of horizontal policies in relation to the functioning of the essence of the economic essence of the European project. So yes, it's important that make this, that we bring this kind of agenda a bit out of the economic debate, and politically we put cohesion as an essential policy for all the other policies of the freedom of goods, freedom of factors can really operate without fragmentation, without cutting the connection between the society with the citizens and the economy. But just very quickly, if you allow me, I would like to really appreciate what Professor Alexandra Fagian mentioned. But in fact, from a European perspective, this lack of understanding that we cannot do contradictory policies because this doesn't make sense sometimes is a bit forgotten. Of course, I would just like to underline that the RRP was an anti-cyclical economic instrument. And of course, it was an emergency instrument to build on the very little European budget in order to recover from the crisis. And that's why it was so speedy, and that's why it was so, apparently flexible. But I subscribe the idea that we don't know yet if it works or not. But in fact, we tried to make it not completely blind spatially, but countries, vary a lot in how they interpret it and how geographically sensitive they were in the implementation of the program. But also, all the questions are very essential because I think it is important to have this understanding at the right level, at the right scale, of what are the blocking elements for the development and the regions, and what is the vision. And when we have, and here I answer Eduardo, I tried to put a little piece in the answer to Eduardo Medeiros and to the last speaker, when we have horizontal instruments that finance, for instance, innovation in general across Europe or across a country, then we often miss the right level of understanding how such an horizontal policy is going to impact the different regions. And so according to the selections that you make, if you are not attentive to these asymmetric impacts of these policies, so if the selection of the projects is done on a pure horizontal basis, disregarding, for instance, some strategic approach that we try to bring in through smart specialization or through a deeper understanding of the different kinds of institutions that are present in certain regions, what has got to be able to be done there, to be done, and what is essential in those regions, then we miss an opportunity because things are kind of spatially blind, and they can really end up harming cohesion. And it is important that we don't see the RRP as a kind of a compensation for the big cities of what cohesion policy is more careful in doing there. And this happens sometimes in some of the policy options of certain member states. And in fact, this coherence can only be achieved if at the political level, territorial convergence is set as the sufficiently high level, as high as the functioning of the internal market, common currency, and the democracy inside the country or inside Europe. Sorry that I expanded a little bit, but the questions are really very interesting. I'm sorry about it, Professor.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. No apologies needed. A lot of interesting issues there. Alessandra, could we go straight on to you? Because I think let's keep this...
Yeah. Let's see if I can answer very quickly to a few questions. Okay, project selection. Right now, I'm actually in these complementary funds, also doing project selection. And it's all via public tenders. And this is a problem because they tend to just do the selection not really based on merit, but based based on other criteria, which are, aside from the timing of when they presented the demand, the fact that they tick or do not tick certain basic criteria. So there should be, and there are like public agencies that do this. So this is an issue, I think. So I totally agree with you on this, that we should do much better in this. But again, I think it's a matter of time, because if we have to spend this amount of money by a very short time frame and we have to select them, initially the deadline was end of the year, now it's March, but we received like 2,000 projects for just one line, and we have, I don't know how many lines of different projects. That is an issue, again. Project evaluation, I'm also required with another group of people to actually do a socioeconomic evaluation of the project. So we started thinking about what to put in. It's not just, I am an economist, but it's not just jobs. We talk about socioeconomic evaluation. So we are also looking at things like gender, the young people. We have an incredible problem with young people. We have a problem with brain drain from peripheral areas. So we would like to actually include a set, we are now thinking about a set of indicators to be used, but that should include also this. And also, it's also important to look at the context where you operate. I right now live not in Milan, which is my original town, but in a, say, intermediate city, which was hit by the earthquake in 2009. The context where I operate is different than Milan or the US or the UK where I was living before. And so you can't expect the same results from different places. The difficulty of the context where you operate should also be taken into account. And more often than not, it's not. So this is something that we're thinking on. On the data, the small scale of the data, I also collaborated quite a bit with the inner area strategy years ago. Now it's not as strong as before, unfortunately. We are talking about municipalities and group of municipalities. We do have the data at this scale. It might be a little bit more difficult to find them, but the data do exist. And you can also go and collect some data on the ground. Talk about migration, we interviewed 1,000 young people in these peripheral areas. It's absolutely true that some of them, about 50% want to stay there, despite the difficult condition. 20% of them actually would like to stay there and they're forced to move out. These are the ones that we're working on. So it's more difficult, but the data are there to at least do some kind of monitoring. I'm very finished, decentralization. I think that I'm not claiming that there should be total decentralization. I always feel like in the middle there is balance. And also that in different stages there should be a different balance between centralization and decentralization. What I'm talking about is in the initial phases, there is a lot of knowledge which is on the ground that might help with looking at what projects we really need. Then when it comes to monitoring and other phases, I totally understand that you need more centralization. And you need, as I said, an enlightened coordination and some intermediaries that make your job easier anyway, otherwise it's impossible. Totally decentralization won't work. There will be a coordination issue.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. Mr. Ehrlich, would you like to comment?
Well, first of all, good morning to you, Professor, and good morning to everybody. I'm very happy that we are here today and I'm very excited because of the start of the conference and being able to speak right now and to discuss in physical the cohesion policy. I think it was about time. Lots of years has passed when we last time had the opportunity to talk about one of the most important policies of the EU. So let me just jump back to the question. Well, as I understood the question of the colleague from the audience, it was the question of how does the projects fit to the policies, and why in his opinion these projects, because of the selection of the projects, are not in line. Sometimes are not in line with the needs of the regions. Well, I would say that the answer lies in the national bodies that should be aware of the projects and the needs of the regions. I think that they need the better approach they have is better of the outcome. So what I mean by that, I mean that if we ensure the bottom-up approaches, and if we are more like, if we have more like place-based approaches, more territorial approach, then this guarantees a better understanding of the needs. Sometimes it's just not enough to put the policy in some kind of a framework and then to wait for projects to happen, because this guarantees that something will come up of this, but you cannot guarantee that always the good projects will be the one who will be implemented. But there's no magical stick, I would say, so that you can design ideal criteria. I think it's a constant work and understanding of the local needs, but ensuring the instruments, such as I said, place-based instruments and bottom-up approach will secure you in this way of getting to the right projects. On national level, I would say we cannot be led by projects. You know, beneficiaries will always tend to see only their projects and their needs. So basically, what we have to do is we have to make the framework of policies, because we implement policies, not a project. And the beneficiaries, this is a clash of interests, because beneficiaries see sometimes only their interest and the interest of the projects. We cannot see only the interest of the projects. We have to see where does these projects in cumulative leads to, and where are they heading to. And this is why it is important to ensure the good understanding and the policies. But as I said, there is no magical stick for such a solution. It is the question of the capacity of the national bodies and working and learning from working with the territories and local and regional level to understand them better. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elish. And Mr. Bock? Okay, sorry, we're not getting the sound at the moment.
It's okay?
It's okay?
Yes. You can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
I will deal with the question concerning the selection projects. I will divide up in two. Concerning the selection for implementation, the main rule should be public tender, because if you have public tender, you avoid corruption, you avoid all kind of lack of transparency. So public tender should be the main rule. If we talk now the other phase of project selection, who is selecting the projects in order to implement it? And here the Secretary of State for Croatia was very clear. And here we should use more decentralization and place-based approach. As I said before, cohesion policy can be seen as a help to self-help. So it's very important that administrative capacity of the regions to provide the expertise of which project should be implemented. So, for example, in the region, you have your own strategy, discussed, debated, approved by the local or regional council, and after that you have projects to implement the strategy. So the projects are a result of a strategy already discussed, already adopted by the community. Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government except of the others. That's right. We have to have democracy on place, democracy live every day. Democracy is like biking. You should exercise your democracy every day in order to keep a strong democracy in your region. And if you do not participate, and if you do not have the mechanism of transparency and participation, you do not have the best projects to be financed, because the projects are a result of a strategy, and the strategy should be a result of a consultation with your citizens. So from that perspective, you need to increase participatory democracy together with representative democracy in order to have the best of it. So from that perspective, I will definitely focus on place-based approach, and I'll give the example of Poland. Poland did twice the administrative reform of the country, from 46 voivodats to 32, and after that from 32 to 16 voivodats, and each voivodat has its own operational program for European funds. You have 16 engines of European funds to bring money in the country, not just one central one. So decentralization again is the key. If we work with decentralization, you have more opportunities to bring the European funds to your country, to your region. If you stay in one central program, of course, sometimes it's good if it's just a small country. But if it's a bigger country, definitely the decentralization is the key. Otherwise, cannot be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much to each of our speakers. We've got time for one or two more questions. Yes, one here, yes please, and then over here.
In fact, I'm Andriana Sukova, I'm the Deputy Director General of DG Employment, so I'll be closing the event tomorrow. But I'm very eager to hear all your thoughts, exchanging ideas and expectations for the post-27. So that's why I decided to join even today. But on some of the points that were made, I want to come back because, for example, talking about decentralization, it's not an automatic thing. It's also a question, what are the responsibilities and the powers of regions? It's not, Alessandro was very right to say, we cannot go for direct decentralization and only regional approach, because there are policies that are developed at national level and they are implemented at regional level, but the policy development happens at national level and we have to keep this into account. I'm full supporter and we have all different models of programming. Poland has 16 regional programs, but they also have few national programs. So France also has national programs and regional. Spain has national and regional programs. So it depends on what are the powers and authorities of regions when they're given the possibility to develop their regional program. And one thing about, somebody mentioned very briefly, the need of coordination. And I tell you that the original proposal of 21-27 legislation didn't have coordinating bodies. We decided, okay, let's give the member states freedom to decide. And the member states in the council insisted that we have, again, the coordinating bodies in the regulation. In the common procedures regulation, we reinstated the coordinating bodies because there is obviously a need for internal national coordination of action. So I think that we are learning as we do some things, and also that's why I'm very glad to have this conference today and tomorrow to hear about your expectations, but also to hear which direction, and I'm glad that Commissioner Ferreira could join this morning to also introduce some of the key questions, because this is what we are contemplating about and we want to see some clarity and some ideas for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And we'll be picking up, I think, these really critical points about the different forms of multi-level governance. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Martin Maris from Slovakia. I don't have the question, but it is merely some compliment to Professor Alessandra and Mr. Secretary of the State. So in my country, there is a great mismatch between the project or the interventions, program interventions, and real needs of the municipalities. Okay, fragmentation of the policy is a big issue, but this mismatch is even worse. For instance, in the Union, there is talk about the innovation, digitalization, and so on. Okay, this is a very important thing, but in my country, about up to half municipalities don't even have the SEVA system. So you cannot go further if you don't have these basic, basic needs. And this is a very big embarrassment for my country. But however, what happens? Okay, my country, there are fines. When you're not keeping the objectives, you are fined. So my country pays fines to the European Commission, but nothing happens at all. It is solved. Okay, what happens next? Okay, place-based theory approach is a very good approach, I think. I am one of the co-author of the integrated territorial investment from my region. It's region on NUTS 3 level. However, okay, we were very happy initially because we developed own strategy. However, what happens next? Our government dedicated so little money, it is just fraction for this investment, and the bulk of the money is coming via the old demand system. So basically, and this great need, for example, developing wastewater management, it needs huge investment. So it haven't come due again. And it fuels discontent in people because they lose the faith on the fundament of the cohesion policy. So this is just my thing.
Okay, thanks very much also for that point, which I think picks up on the earlier comment. I mean, we have this perhaps dichotomy here. We have on the one hand greater prescriptiveness and in terms of top-down policy making, yet a demand for more citizen-engaged, more place-based policy responses addressing the needs of regions and municipalities. We've almost hit our coffee break time, but I just want to give each of our speakers the opportunity to take perhaps just 1 minute to either comment on what the comments that have just been made or make any other further reflections. Commissioner, perhaps we can start with you.
Well, thank you very much. I think what we just listened to is relevant on two grounds. One ground, we need to go at the right level in terms of devising the strategy and then giving flexibility according to the needs of each region. And the interpretation of we have got to do greening and digital has got then to be fine-tuned to the needs of regions. I think there are regions that in fact basically they need basic infrastructures, of course, as a precondition for growth. I would argue that all across Europe, basic infrastructures are associated with basic democratic rights. And so that in fact, we cannot end up with one size fits all. But for this, we need a certain degree of decentralization and the political acceptance and the selecting of cohesion in itself as a core value of the political agenda, whatever the party line that each country opts for. So decentralization, or at least understanding and working at the regional level and adapting the policy instruments to whatever is blocking to necessary conditions and sufficient conditions are, I think, have got to be brought back into the agenda if they are not there, but respecting, of course, the democratic and administrative options of each member state. But if a country is very centralized, and if that is the national option, of course, the country has got to be intelligent enough to structure itself in a sense that at the right level in each region, they have the capacity to understand what is blocking development, what is needed, and to adapt and fine-tune the horizontal policies as well as the more precise instruments in order to deliver what is needed in the available timing. So I think this kind of fine-tuning of the instruments of the policy is definitely required for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Ellis, a 1 minute final point.
Well, I'm just add on the decentralization point, maybe a point of view. I think it is important. One, it was raising a question of does the regional authorities have the capacities? I think it is a right question to do the decentralization system. But I think that the question is even more complex, is that if they don't have the capacity, when will they build it? So that you have to give them the opportunity to build it and somehow have your policies designed that you eventually decentralize. So you cannot, I don't take an agreement that you cannot decentralize because there is no capacities. Even member states, they didn't have the capacities to do the cohesion policy. This is for Croatia the first perspective, we had to build the capacities. So if you want to decentralize, you have to have the intention to decentralize, and you have to build the capacities of the region to decentralize, because it is better, because it's closer to the needs of the territory, and it is closer to the needs of the project that the region needs. And just a short one regarding the service system of the colleague who asked this question. This is something that I heard a lot in Croatia, because there are very much of the lagging behind territories that needs the basic infrastructure first of all. But there is no one solution for this kind of a problem. These are very heavy, large infrastructure that asks for lots of money. But you have to have your own local strategy. You have to invest in both. You have to invest in a savage system and basic infrastructure, but you have to also invest in the 21st century infrastructure if you want to bring back life in these kind of areas. So basically, you have to catch up. You have to do two things, and what developing countries didn't have to do and they had time to do. So it's up to your local strategies on how you will manage to do it. It's not easy, but there is no one solution for doing it. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bach, I think you probably echo a number of the points that have been made.
Thank you. Very shortly. Commissioner Ferreira said very well about decentralization and national dimension. The fine-tuning is the answer between national and regional level. Of course, as a representative of local and regional authorities, I strongly advocate the decentralization and the subsidiarity principle, because it's very clear, in order to be more efficient, you have to keep the decision to the authority which is the closest to the needs of our citizens. And the local and regional authorities, of course, are closest to their citizens. The national level should keep the legislation and the control, but the implementation should be taken at the local level in order to be efficient. But as Commissioner said, you should have fine-tuning between these two domains, and it's not one against each other. If you have decentralization, does not mean that you may have some national plans, some national policies on specific topics. That's possible, but the subsidiarity principle, which is at the base of our European Union, should be respected. The second point, cohesion policy, as I said, should be embedded in every policy of the European Union in order to have in each domain cohesion policy, not just focusing on the cohesion itself. The third element, and I close it, cohesion policy should not be perceived in the future as a cohesion policy for crisis. Of course, it's good when we have a crisis, we have immediately a solution. That was with the Ukrainian refugee crisis, we had the cohesion policy, which is good. But we have not to lose the long-term perspective of the cohesion policy. So the cohesion policy should not be perceived in the future as a deposit of money for all the others, because we are going to lose the essence of the cohesion policy. So if we need new programs of new emergencies, we need fresh money, new money, and leave the money for cohesion policy, for the main scope of the cohesion policy on the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bach. And lastly, very briefly.
Very quickly, I agree with everything that has been said. I just want to echo some of the things that I've said, at least one, which is, I think that Europe should push the national government to have a more cohesive and systematic policy for these peripheral areas, which at the moment they don't have. And I'm not talking about macro distinction, but more finer territorial level, which is peripheral versus core areas. And this policy should have two parts. One, which is on essential services, so that we reduce the discontent of people and also this feeling of this mismatch, right, between their needs and what the funds can do. And the second one, looking at the future. So what kind of strategic planning do they have for the future? It's really weird that in a national plan of recovery and resilience, under the chapter health, you don't have any mention to peripheral areas whose essential services are lacking in health, education, and transportation needs, and so on. They're doing some in transportation needs, but I mean, I found it very difficult to understand why it was not mentioned in health, the needs for peripheral areas, for instance.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, unfortunately, we've now got to break for coffee, but I think this session has set us up beautifully for the debates today and tomorrow. It's outlined the challenges, all the complexities. It's really shown the value of having both practitioners and academics talking together about the key issues and also the open questions and where there's a need for evidence, where there's a need for research, where there's a need for further knowledge exchange. Can I just remind you, unfortunately, we didn't have any questions online, but RSA Europe have created this beautiful app to make this as paperless conference as possible. If you haven't already signed up for the app, please do download it and use it. It's not just got information on the agenda and the participants. You can also use it for dialogue and for exchange, and there will be QR codes in each of the sessions that you can use for information on the speakers, the papers, and so on. So, in final, thank you very much indeed to each of our 4 speakers. Thank you for your attention, and perhaps you could join me in giving a round of applause to our plenary speakers for a really interesting session.